The observation gallery remained still long after the final words had settled. Below them, the facility's vast central shaft continued to operate exactly as it had before. Platforms descended. Empty frames rose. Security escorts moved beside sealed containment units. Power traveled through the walls in quiet, controlled pulses. Nothing in the structure acknowledged that the wolves had finally understood the trick. The facility kept presenting motion because it had no reason to believe the motion had stopped working. Everlyn watched another transport descend into the darkness and did nothing. That was the first change. Before, every visible convoy had demanded attention. Every escort had suggested importance. Every sealed unit had carried the possibility that someone from the pack might be inside. The facility had learned to use that urgency against them, forcing them to chase what moved, while the real decisions remained buried somewhere unseen. Now the pack stood together and allowed the transport to disappear. Kane tracked it until the final edge of the platform vanished below the observation barrier, but he did not move after it. Lira listened to the security escort fade into the lower structure, but she did not follow the sound. Malek adjusted the rescued wolf against his shoulder and waited. Across the gallery, the other wolves held their positions with the same deliberate restraint. It was harder than fighting. Fighting gave instinct somewhere to go. Waiting required control. Everlyn felt the strain moving through the group. The missing pack remained below. Captives were still being relocated. The civilians behind them were exhausted, frightened, and hungry. Every delay felt like surrendering ground they could not afford to lose. The facility depended on that feeling. It wanted urgency to become predictability. It wanted the wolves to believe that stillness meant failure. Everlyn had no intention of giving it what it wanted. "The facility still thinks we're chasing transports," she said quietly. Kaelen remained beside the exposed panel, studying the faint green pathways beneath its casing. For now, the words carried no triumph. Their new understanding was not protection. It was only a temporary advantage, and the facility had already proven how quickly it could erase those. Kaelen had stopped following the movement itself, but ignoring the obvious trails left her facing something more difficult: the absence beneath them. She needed to identify the parts of the facility that did not change when everything else did. She began with power. Not where it surged during relocations, not where containment fields strengthened or transport systems activated. Those loads were reactions. She searched instead for the power that never disappeared. Constant consumption, permanent demand, systems that remained fed even while entire research wings were abandoned. The panel offered fragments rather than answers, but the fragments behaved differently now that she knew what not to chase. One signal remained stable beneath 3 separate reroutes. Another continued drawing power even after the sector attached to it had been declared inactive. A third disappeared from the visible architecture entirely, yet the surrounding systems still adjusted themselves around it. Kaelen traced each one carefully, building no map anyone else could see. "There are fixed loads beneath the shifting ones," she said. "They're hidden inside ordinary systems, but they don't behave like them. Everything around them changes. They don't." Kane looked toward the panel. "The roots." "Maybe," Kaelen replied. "Or supports. We don't know enough yet." Everlyn appreciated the caution. They had already paid for every assumption the facility encouraged them to make. This time, they would not name the answer before they understood it. Lira moved away from the group and approached the corridor leading out of the gallery. She stopped before the threshold, head slightly lowered, her body held in that careful balance between human control and predatory awareness. The passage beyond was empty, No movement, no voices, no patrol rhythm. Even the ventilation had softened until the air barely seemed to move at all. Her expression changed. Everlyn noticed immediately. "What is it?" Lira did not turn. "It's different?" Kane glanced toward the corridor. "Quieter?" "No." Lira listened for another moment, then slowly straightened. "It isn't hiding anymore." The wolves watched her. Lira finally looked back at Everlyn. "It's watching." The words shifted the atmosphere more effectively than any alarm could have. Everlyn felt the truth of it settle. The facility had spent hours shaping their choices, closing routes, opening others, placing convoys where they could be seen. Its behavior had been active, almost insistent. Now that motion had reduced. Doors remained open longer. Transport traffic thinned. Security patterns stopped repeating often enough to be useful. The facility had not become passive. It had become patient. Kaelen looked away from the panel and studied the corridor. It was already watching. "Not like this," Lira said. "Before, it moved around us. Now it's waiting." Kane's gaze hardened. "Waiting for what?" "Our next mistake," Everlyn said. No one disagreed. The realization spread through the wider pack. Wolves who had been watching exits shifted their attention toward the walls and ceilings. Others moved closer to the civilians without clustering around them. The facility might not understand the nature of the pack, but it had learned that the group responded as one. If it wanted another mistake, it would look for the pressure point most likely to force them into action. The civilians, the injured, the rescued wolf. Everlyn looked toward Malek. He understood before she spoke and adjusted his position, placing himself between the weakest members of the group and the open corridor. The other wolves mirrored the change in smaller ways, creating layers of protection rather than one obvious formation. No order passed between them, no signal the facility could easily isolate. The pack simply changed shape. That was the second change. They were no longer only studying the facility. They were managing what the facility was allowed to study about them. Kaelen returned to the panel. "We need to test it." Kane gave her a skeptical look. "By making a mistake?" "By offering it one." Everlyn considered that. "What do you need?" "A visible choice it already understands." Kaelen nodded toward the shaft. "Another convoy." They did not have to wait long. A low vibration traveled through the observation gallery as a transport platform approached from an upper route. The facility made no attempt to conceal it. Lights activated along the descending lane. Security fields tightened around the shaft. A heavy containment convoy moved into view, carrying several sealed units and 2 compact data cores under Xarthian escort. Every element had been chosen to attract attention. Kane's body tightened instinctively. Lira's head followed the leading escort. Several wolves further back shifted their weight forward before stopping themselves. The civilians looked toward the movement with renewed fear. The facility had learned enough to make the bait convincing. Everlyn watched the convoy pass. Then she turned away from it. The action rippled through the pack. Kane forced his focus away from the platform and watched the gallery entrances instead. Lira listened beyond the convoy's noise. Malek remained still. One by one, the other wolves abandoned the visible target and turned their attention elsewhere. The transport descended untouched. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Kaelen saw it. A tiny pulse traveled through one of the fixed pathways beneath the panel. Not power. Communication. So brief and so deeply buried that she would have missed it while tracking the convoy itself. The pulse traveled upward against the apparent direction of every nearby system, disappeared behind an inactive environmental channel, then returned carrying a new instruction. Kaelen smiled faintly. Good. Kane looked at her. What? It asked why we didn't follow. The smile vanished as quickly as it appeared. The meaning was too serious to enjoy. The convoy had not simply been moved. Its passage had been observed. Their response compared against expectation, and the result reported somewhere beyond the systems visible to them. Everlyn stepped beside her. Can you follow the report? Not yet, but I can see where the facility tried to hide it. Kaelen traced the route with one finger. That's different. Movement flows downward. This went against it. Back to whoever was watching, Everlyn said. Kaelen nodded. The facility had revealed a thread. Not because the wolves had chased what it moved, because they had refused. Before Kaelen could search further, the hidden pathway vanished. The surrounding systems reorganized instantly, folding the communication route into unrelated traffic until no clear trace remained. The facility had recognized exposure and corrected, but not before Kaelen saw enough. It knows we changed, she said. Everlyn looked toward the corridor where Lira still stood listening. And now it knows we know it changed. For a moment, the gallery felt less like shelter and more like a room shared with an unseen intelligence. The facility was not simply observing bodies moving through its corridors. It was measuring understanding. Their choices were no longer being treated as prisoner behavior or uncontrolled resistance. Something in the command layers had begun reviewing them as intentional opposition. The hunt had become mutual. Far from the observation gallery, beyond the research sectors and transport infrastructure, a command briefing had already begun. The chamber was built for efficiency rather than grandeur. Senior Xarthian officers stood around a central projection, displaying the facility's operational state in layered bands of light. Research losses appeared beside containment failures. Security incidents overlapped with transport delays. Automated conclusions scrolled beneath each report, assigning causes, probabilities, and recommended responses with complete confidence. High Commander Malek listened without interruption. A research officer spoke first, explaining that losses remained within recoverable thresholds and that priority subjects had been successfully relocated. A containment officer followed, reporting that the original breach had fragmented into several smaller movements and was being managed through sector isolation. Security blamed delayed information from automated routing. Systems blamed unauthorized interference with control nodes. Each department offered an explanation that made sense within its own boundaries. Together, they described a facility succeeding in several incompatible ways. Malek read the reports while they spoke. His expression remained controlled, but his attention sharpened each time one conclusion contradicted another. Containment claimed the escaped subjects were isolated, yet research reported continued interference across multiple levels. Security claimed relocation routes remained protected, yet subjects had been removed from an active redesign chamber. Systems insisted adaptive responses were working, while the number of compromised sectors continued to rise. He looked up at last. How many sectors? The officers fell quiet. His second-in-command checked the latest summary. 9, High Commander. 9. Malek returned his gaze to the display. Containment describes the breach as fragmented. Security describes the threat as localized. Research describes the losses as controlled, yet 9 sectors have been compromised. No one answered. He opened another report, then another. He gave each the same measured attention, as though offering the officers one final opportunity to recognize the problem before he said it aloud. "You have all reached different conclusions," he said, using the same information. The second-in-command stepped forward slightly. "The facility assigns probability according to departmental priority. Variations in interpretation are expected. Contradiction is not variation." The officer held his position. "The automated summaries remain the most reliable assessment available." Malek closed the report. The sound was quiet. It silenced the room. "Either every department aboard this facility has become incompetent within the same operational cycle," he said, "or the questions being asked are wrong." A research officer began to respond. Malek raised one hand, and the words died immediately. He looked at the projection again, but now he ignored the conclusions entirely. Beneath them lay fragments of raw events, door states, interrupted fields, rerouted power, missing personnel, impossible recovery patterns. The system had taken every fragment and forced it into classifications it already understood. Malek had seen that kind of failure before. Not here, on Earth. He did not allow the thought to show. His second-in-command continued carefully. "High Commander, the system has reviewed all available data. Its behavioral assessment remains—" "I did not ask what the system concluded." The officer stopped. Malek's eyes remained fixed on the projection. "You have shown me what it believes happened." He turned toward the room. "Now show me what actually happened." Silence followed, not uncertainty. Discomfort. No one had reviewed the events without the facility's interpretation. They had trusted the summaries because the summaries were efficient, consistent, and designed to prevent exactly this kind of delay. Raw footage was slower, messier, open to judgment. Human judgment, Everlyn might have called it. Malek saw only neglected evidence. "Bring me the raw surveillance," he ordered. His second-in-command hesitated. "High Commander, the system has already reviewed the recordings." Malek looked at him. Cold. Measured. "I did not ask what it reviewed." A small pause opened between them. "I asked for the footage." No one challenged him again. Across the facility, an archive request traveled down through command layers the wolves had only just begun to identify. Sealed recordings unlocked. Security feeds were gathered without analysis. Images the system had classified as irrelevant, corrupted or explained, were pulled together and prepared for direct review. Far below, Everlyn stared into the quiet corridor and felt something change without knowing why. Not in the facility. Behind it. For the first time since she entered the Xarthian structure, someone beyond the machine had started looking back.